The article is the 8th episode of the 3rd season of Everybody Loves Raymond. This is directed by Will Mackenzie, and as always there will be spoilers from now as I go through the episode chronologically and share some thoughts. It's definitely not a bad episode, there's nothing wrong with it, other than I feel like it's a little bit slow. Not a lot happens. There is one scene in particular that I think went on way longer than it needed to, but in general, I don't mind the episode. It starts off with Frank trying to read the paper at the table. Marie tells him no reading at the table, so he says he's going to shave his head, and Marie goes off to hide the razors, buying Frank the time he needs to read the paper. It's a fun way to start things off. In fact, I think for me, the scenes I favoured in this episode are definitely the scenes with Marie and Frank. They're in it quite a few times, and I really rather enjoyed their scenes the most. We're then in conversation with Ray and Andy has asked Ray to provide him some feedback on an article he's written. And we do have this brilliant quote from Ray, and speaking as a writer, I think this is a brilliant piece of advice. He says, and I quote, "What separates the men from the boys is the willingness to take notes, rewrite, and make it better." And I think that's fantastic. Obviously, the men from the boys bit doesn't speak to me, but to be a good writer, you have to be willing to rewrite and improve. Well, there might be exceptions, but in general, if you write something, your first draft is never going to be amazing. There will be exceptions, but generally speaking, you can always get feedback, you can always improve, and I think that that's a really good attitude to have, the willingness to make everything better. Even if you read your own piece of writing that you wrote 6 months ago, a year ago, 2 years ago, you will see your own areas of improvement. And it's nice for Ray to be able to offer Andy this feedback. Although, that being said, Andy doesn't necessarily take it too easily, because on the one hand, it is important to accept feedback. On the other, it hurts when somebody points out a whole lot of things that could be better. Even if it's constructive, it does hurt a little bit, and this is what we see here. Ray is talking about this with Debra in the evening. We have the bedroom scene, and Debra points out that Ray maybe had a bit of a bad attitude about it. Honestly, I don't really think that came across, at least when he was talking with Andy. I think he spoke to Andy in a really encouraging, supportive way. Who cares what his attitude is like behind closed doors? As long as he approaches Andy correctly, I think that's the main thing. But Debra has a few things to say. And this is the scene that seemed to just go on forever, and I didn't really get much out of it, to be honest. Aside from Ray needing a new toothbrush, I don't really think the scene served that much of a purpose. We're then back with Andy and Ray, and Andy sent the article into Sports Illustrated, and they accepted it. This is a bit of a blow for Ray, because he's always wanted to be in Sports Illustrated, and then he finds out that Andy sent in the article without Ray's corrections. That's going to sting. And he goes home and he's kind of still really upset about this, to the point where he throws Sports Illustrated in the trash. And the audience's reaction when Debra said, "Oh, Ray, did Sports Illustrated reject you again?" It was bitter, because what she said would have stung. The audience's reaction was fantastic. And obviously Ray explains what had happened, and Debra, the conversation continues a little bit, and Debra ends up saying that Ray is maybe a bit self-centered and not just with Andy, and Ali is trying to talk to him and he's not listening, and he's clearly more concerned about his problems. And this is not something I'd ever realised with Ray as a character before, but when I kind of reflect on previous episodes, I have seen every episode, but I honestly can't remember that many episodes after this. But when I look back on previous episodes, whenever there is a problem, it's usually Ray. Or if somebody else has a problem, Ray doesn't really resolve it that much. He occasionally, yes, but I think Debra has a bit of a valid point there. And we're then back in Marie and Frank's kitchen. Marie is cutting an English muffin, and Frank says you're supposed to open it with a fork, and Marie says that the factory opens it with a fork, and I have got no idea what they're talking about. And one of my favourite quotes in the entire thing is when Marie says to Frank, "I'm going to smush you into a nook." Absolutely loved it. Ray has actually gone over there to get a blue toothbrush. Robert is there doing his laundry. we do get the information that he has moved out. He didn't move back in with him after he left the garage apartment, or the apartment over the garage from the last episode, and Ray ends up getting a yellow toothbrush. And Robert confirms that Debra had been mentioning Andy in Sports Illustrated, and the conversation of being self-centered picks up again, and Marie says, yes, you are self-centered and you have every reason to be because you're special. And I think in that moment it became clear maybe why Ray thought the world revolved around him. I don't think he consciously thinks that, but I think because he has grown up as his mother's golden boy, rather, maybe he's never been conditioned to think about other people because Marie has constantly been thinking about him and telling him how wonderful he is. And this is obviously something Robert has had an issue with from day one. And of course, everybody loves Raymond, and it seems like that's had a maybe negative effect with him not consciously being a little bit self-centered. And the kitchen scene is absolute chaos, but it's brilliantly done. And then we find out from Andy that actually Sports Illustrated basically rewrote the article. So they liked his ideas, but not the words he used. And apparently they made corrections that Ray had suggested, which I guess would have been nice for Ray to hear. That scene kind of fell a little bit flat. I feel like we didn't get enough out of that scene, and we absolutely could have taken time from the bedroom scene and fleshed out that scene a little bit more. We could have had a more meaningful conversation between Ray and Andy. We could have found out a little bit more about how Ray feels in response to that information, but I feel like it was an underdeveloped scene. And then we have the very last scene, which is absolutely adorable. Marie is once again cooking in the kitchen, and Frank lifts up his paper and it's just been shredded down the middle. And Marie says, quite simply, fork split. And there we end the episode. And it's a delightful way to end it. Very funny ending. Really enjoyed Marie and Frank in this. I think Ray is a very interesting character. And as I said, I had never necessarily thought of him as being self-centered before, but it's an interesting point that the episode raises. And of course, if we dig deeper into the way he was raised as a child, has that had a knock-on effect on the way he views not necessarily other people? I don't think he's self-centered because he doesn't care for other people. I think he's self-centered because he's been brought up to believe that he is exceptionally important, or his work is exceptionally important. And I don't know, I feel like now that he's aware of it, it's maybe something that might change, or maybe the concept of Ray being self-centered will never come up again. Either way, I thought it was a pretty decent episode. Apart from one scene that was a little bit slow, not much happened. I think they could have done a bit more with the final scene with Ray and Andy. But in general, the article is not a bad episode.